Hi, everybody. This is Gabriella Grasso. I am a journalist, and with Q Code Mag, which is a web magazine that has been online for 8 years now and covers stories from all over the world, and also has a print edition now since last year that comes out every 6 months. We are very pleased to introduce a series of interviews with authors from various countries. The idea with Q Code Mag is that of creating bridges between different cultures to open up to different points of view. So that is also the reason why we decided to do the interviews in English, so that, you know, as many people as possible could follow, and also to create, you know, and have a direct conversation with the authors. Now, today, I am very honored to have with me Deepa Anappara. Hi, Deepa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
She's connected from the UK, so we're going to talk about her book. Deepa is an Indian writer. This is her first novel. She's a journalist. She was a journalist. I don't know if you keep doing journalism still, but she has been a journalist for 11 years in her country. And while being a journalist, she covered many stories about poverty in India and how it affects children especially. And I think now we will ask her that this is where this book comes from. The book is called La pattuglia dei bambini. It's published in Italian in Italy by Einaudi, in a translation by Monica Pareschi. The original title is Gin Patrol on the Purple Line. And it's a story about a young boy, very young, I think he's 9. He lives in a slum in India, in the outskirts of an Indian city, which doesn't have a name. And what happens in the slum is that a young boy disappears. And then after him, another one, and then another one. So all the slum is overwhelmed by these disappearances. And Jay, he's fond of TV series with investigations. So he decides to involve his 2 best friends, Patty, who's a girl, a very bright, intelligent girl, and Faiz, who is a friend of Jay, and he's Muslim, and this is an important detail in the story. And he involves him in an investigation. Now, what happens in the book is not so much, the reader is not so much involved into solving mysteries. So there is a mystery, but you're not sort of reading it. That's not the point, solving the mystery. The point, I think, of the author, what I got as a reader, is that of showing us a world. And the world that Deepa shows us, it's a very cruel one. And the cruelty of this world, it's balanced by the gaze that Jay has on things, because Jay is a young boy. He has a naive look, a naive point of view. So I think this balances a bit the cruelty of what we see and what we read. So of course, Deepa, I would start exactly by asking you, how did you come to this book? I know it comes from the stories you discovered while you were working as a journalist, but could you tell us more? How did you think about, writing it?
Sure. Thank you so much for the great introduction to my book, first of all, because, sometimes people ask me, why did you write this very dark story from a child's point of view? But I think you understood exactly why I did that, because it is a very difficult story. And I felt that I had to balance that darkness with some lightness. And here that comes from Jay's point of view, who, because he's a 9-year-old boy, he has a different view of, things that he sees. In terms of how I came to this story, as you said, I was working as a reporter in India. I used to go to impoverished neighborhoods like Jay's neighborhood, where there were not many facilities. And I used to interview them for my stories. And that's how I heard about areas where, many children had gone missing over 2 or 3 years. So the numbers were quite shocking. So that something like 20 or 30 children had gone missing in that particular neighborhood. and no effort had been made to find them because these people were poor. They didn't have any money to offer the police. They didn't have any influence over politicians. So their stories were completely ignored. Because I used to write on education and I used to interview children. So I wanted to write the story from the children's point of view, how they experienced these disappearances. What was it like for them to see their friends disappear? How did they deal with that? How did they still get up and go to school and just do everything that they do in the neighborhood? And I initially thought I would write it as nonfiction, but because my life changed and I ended up moving away from India, I didn't quite get around to doing that story. But it was something that stayed with me, and then several years later, almost a decade later, I went back to it to explore it through fiction. So it definitely has origins in real life stories in India of disappearances. The numbers are quite huge, which is 180 children is the estimated number. There could be some variation because not all cases are reported. As you see in my novel, the police don't always take down the complaint, so they just dismiss it, saying the child has run away because of the situation at home. But it's something that happens every day. It's a reality for many parents that they don't know where their children are. And my interest was really to explore that through the perspective of children, to see how they will deal with this kind of trauma.
It's exactly when you said the figure was 180 children a day. That's what actually Jay's teacher says. And I was going to ask you if it was a real, the figure was right. What happens to these children? What's the hypothesis that people make about what happens?
So I think essentially Jay does talk about this in the novel as well. I think most of these children are being trafficked, which is that they're being sent to cities like Bombay or Delhi or Bangalore, and they're sent to those areas where they're made to work, say in factories or in the homes of rich people as laborers. So in India, because labor is not, they're not paid the basic minimum wage as people should be paid. So labor is cheap. So you can have a person working in your home. And it's even more cheaper if it is a child who's essentially being trafficked. So this is what people do. You will see stories in the newspapers about a child being rescued and who had been kept shut in a room or in the closet in a rich person's home and who had been doing all the work around the house. There's lot of many of these children are sent to factories, textiles, fireworks factories employ a lot of children. And then there's also obviously sex trafficking is unfortunately also a part of it, that children are used for prostitution as well. And so there's other forms of abuse. Not all cases of children missing are related to trafficking. Sometimes children run away from home because the circumstances are very difficult at home, and sometimes it might be that kind of middleman or somebody who's known to the parents goes up to them and tells them, look, we'll take your child to the city and we'll put them in school, good school or a vocational school, and they'll have a better life there. And the parents, because they're in this very difficult financial situation, agrees with that, thinking this is what is better for the child. But then the child is sort of pushed into this situation of labor or working in factories or in brothels essentially. But it's something that the parents are not always aware of. So it's a number of factors, but all of that can be connected to being the poverty which exists and which forces people into all these, having to do all these very desperate things to keep to stay alive. It also is partly because of the lack of policing, lack of enforcement of law. So all those factors combine together to create the situation.
Is public opinion and the media aware of the huge number? I mean, do they acknowledge the fact that it's a huge problem?
So I think you would expect that this would be a sort of story every day in a newspaper. I think in the West, what I've seen is that a child goes missing, it's a big story. But it also depends where the child has gone missing, what sort of neighborhood, what is the race. So a poor child going missing is not a big story, because people, the mainstream discourse is very middle class. It's, it's very based on people who speak English, and that excludes a whole lot of, most of the country. And so what happens to a poor person is not really part of, this, it's not part of the media discussions. It is not that it's, it's not that, I think everybody's aware that the number of children going missing are quite huge. There's been some efforts. In fact, after the, in the past few years, the government has been making some effort to trace children. But I think until all these other factors such as poverty, corruption, and enforcement of law, all that is tackled, it's still going to be difficult. And to answer your question, it doesn't make the news as it should have. Yeah.
Okay. I was very curious to know, as you actually met young boys like Jay, how was talking to them? How did they interact with you? What was their attitude towards you, asking them questions?
Yeah, I would say that mostly they were not interested in talking to me, because I was writing about, government policy, about education, whether they were in school or not, how they found school. And it was not something that as kids they are interested in talking about. And children are very rooted in the present. They're just interested in what's happening right in front of them, and they don't really want to talk about the big picture. So it was actually, for me, the way to engage them was by talking about TV, because almost everybody has a TV in their homes. Whatever state or whatever class you are, there's typically a TV, or there's a community place where you can watch movies and TV as well. So I would ask them what they like to watch, and what they're interested in. If they're, something about Hindi film songs, and Hindi films are hugely popular. So we would talk about that. And so that was my way of engaging with them. And I've written in the book as well that, I don't want to make it sound like, I don't want to romanticize poverty, in the sense that I don't want to say, oh, all poor people are good. It's not something simplistic like that. But because they were children, it was not that they try to find some sort of happiness in whatever they were doing. If it was just sort of playing with a balloon or a plastic bag which they'd found on the ground. So I did try to capture that sense of, their humor and their wit and their resilience in Jay and the other characters.
I read in an interview that you said writing about poverty in India, it's a risky enterprise. Why would you say is it a risky enterprise?
It's primarily, I think it's because in the West, there is a certain attitude towards India. So if it's, either it's seen as exotic or it's seen as a really poor country. And I write one story, then that's taken to be as representative of all of India. So this one story of Jay is the story of every Indian boy. And that is not true. And if you're a Western writer, you don't face that problem. So, if I read a book in which a white man behaves very badly, I don't think this is representative of all white men. But as a writer of color, I do face that problem. And I'm very aware of how my country is portrayed in the West. And I think people get many things wrong because, you've spent too little time in India, or you don't really know the country. And I was aware that I should not feed into those misrepresentations, because it's a huge country. There's all sorts of people. There's, everybody's different. And I didn't want anyone to read the book and just see only the poverty. I really wanted people to see the characters. For me, that was really important, that they should not be reduced to these very dire circumstances that they're in. So, I wanted them to shine through as people, and not sort of this tagline being just poverty being what that came through, but that they are people and their characters. And so I wanted to be honest to the situation for many people in India, but at the same time, without sort of producing this narrative that would be very easily digestible in the West. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to present a complicated story as it really is. And I knew that it was going to be tough writing a story like this, which is about, people who are very poor because of various circumstances. And I didn't want anyone to think that this is what India is about. And also, Indian readers have certain expectations. And I think because I lived in India for so long, I know how we look at works where, it's just portrayed as a country which is uh, in one dimension. So, yeah, so I was aware of all that. And yeah, I was wondering how to balance all those issues.
How was the book received in India and outside of India? Did you see any differences?
Not really. I wouldn't say so much. I think the only difference is that in India, people know what I'm writing about. They're familiar with the culture. And so in the West, I would get, some of the responses would be that they didn't understand um, the words or some of the vocabulary, or they would say they didn't get the pop culture reference. But whereas in India, people do know, what I've written about. Um, I was actually worried that people might see this as a misrepresentation of my country, as I just said. But I think on the whole, primarily the reviews were quite, they understood that what I was trying to do, so which was good. And the book has won a couple of literary prizes in India, and it's been shortlisted for a prize as well. So I think it's a good indication that people have received it in the spirit in which I wrote it, and that it is a huge relief for me, because I think I did worry about how an Indian reader would respond to that. And in fact, when I was writing the book, I actually thought my only consideration was, if someone from Jai's community were to read this novel, how would they respond to it? Would they find it offensive, or would they understand what I was trying to write? Would they see themselves in the book? And for me, that was the prime consideration when writing the novel. I wasn't thinking about anybody else.
Okay. By the way, I want to say that at the end of the book, there is like a dictionary for
Oh
all
yeah,
words.
glossary. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I saw it too late. So I read the book wondering what some of the words meant, and then at the end I discovered there are Hindu words, right?
Hindi words and
Hindi
Urdu
words.
words. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Another topic in the book is the mistrust between the Muslim community and the Hindu community. What happens is that at one point someone spreads a word that the Muslim are responsible for the disappearance of the children. So everybody turns. There's a sort of struggle that starts in the slum. So is that a reality now? Is it gone worse? What's the situation between the two communities right now?
Unfortunately, we have a government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which is very much focused on Hindu supremacy. The Indian Constitution says that all religions are the same and there should be no discrimination against any religion. But unfortunately, what we have seen is that, just as you see right-wing parties in the West talking about, purity of blood based on race, what you're seeing is something similar in India, where people are talking about Hindus being uh, the uh, they're the I don't know what word to use, because yeah, but essentially there's sort of fundamentalist attitude saying that Hindus are they are the people who have the right to India and not people from any other religion. And it is they've the government has tried to pass many laws trying to discriminate against Muslims. There have been protests against it as well. But we've reached a situation now where if you say something about the government, you could end up in jail. There's so many journalists who've been put in jail, in prison, and they've been in prison for so many months and years because they criticize the government. And India says it's the biggest democracy in the world, but if it's a democracy, then why can't I criticize my government? I don't understand that. And so for that reason itself, so many people have been arrested. And so there's an atmosphere where we are going towards this country which says, only Hindus have the right to be here. It's other minority communities, including Muslims, people from lower castes are being suppressed. We are right now seeing farmers protesting, and the government is built a sort of fortress around Delhi as if its own citizens are, its enemies. And this is not something that you see in a democracy. So I would say the situation has worsened terribly. And I do blame, it's not just on the part of politicians. As a society, we've allowed this to happen. And so what's in the book is a reflection of what it's like in real life. Something goes wrong, the tendency is to immediately blame the minority group and say they are the ones causing all this trouble, because it's very easy to do so, and you don't have to look within to see where are you actually going wrong. And this is, it's not just in India, it's been happening everywhere. As an immigrant here, I see, I'm being blamed for anything that's going wrong in this country. And it's in India, it's the same thing is happening. And it's very unfortunate. And I mean, it's very easy for me to criticize the government from here, but there are journalists who are doing this work on the ground and they're being put in prison. And yeah, it is a very depressing and difficult situation.
Is that one of the reasons why you moved to the United Kingdom?
Oh, no, not at all. This is several years ago, before, this prospect of a man like Modi being prime minister was a reality. Yeah.
We have a couple of more minutes, so I might ask you a last question before we end reading the beginning of the book. I was very interested by the fact that I've always thought that the idea of India being a spiritual place, with gurus and babas, was more a Western idea. But actually in the book, Jay talks about, Baba that he sees on TV. There is a Baba which is called in the slum to help solving the problem. So would you say something about that? I'm really curious.
I think some of that has to do with what I just mentioned, which is that we have a government which believes in Hindu supremacy, which is given all sorts of, it's elevated priests and sages into this, not only being celebrities on TV, but one of them is a chief minister holding an important post in one of the Indian states. So part of this explosion has happened, or they've gained more legitimacy because we have a government which supports them and supports all these, insane things that they say about health or anything. They actually don't have the expertise to speak on these matters, but now they're allowed to speak. And so there is actually that going on, and they're connected to these political parties as well, as you see in the book. So I wanted the book to reflect that. There's always been, it is, I won't say everybody is spiritual, but spirituality is people believe in whatever religion they practice. You go to temples, mosques, or churches. I grew up in Kerala where all three religions were, there were people of all three religions around me. And so, we would go to the temple. My friends would go to we would hear the call of the muezzin, and, there was a church, and we would celebrate Christmas as well. So that was the sort of country that I grew up in. But now it's become very different with, this attempt to have one religion dominate. And this belief in this spirituality and people, I think it's always been there in the Beatles came to India so many years ago, but now it's at a different level. You see people sprouting these magic words about religion, and then suddenly they become famous. Yeah, so it's actually an unfortunate side effect of everything else that's going on.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it spirituality. For me, spirituality means something else.
Yeah, maybe we can say that spirituality is genuine and these people are not so genuine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, would you read us the beginning of the book? Just,
Sure. So I have the British edition, and that's
wow.
Yeah. I wish I could read Italian, but unfortunately I can't. I apologize. So this is just the very first page, actually. It's narrated from, it's a mythical story about a ghost that people in the neighborhood believe in.
What is the ghost called?
He's called Mental.
Mental. In Italian is il matto. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When Mental was alive, he was a boss man with 18 or 20 children working for him. and he almost never raised his hand against any of them. Every week, he gave them 5 stars to split between themselves, or packs of gems, and he made them invisible to the police and the evangelist types who wanted to salvage them from the streets, and the men who watched them with hungry eyes as the children hurtled down railway tracks, gathering up plastic water bottles before a train could ram into them. Mendel didn't mind if his ragpicker boys gave him 5 Bisleri bottles instead of 50, or if he caught them outside the cinema when they should have been working, wearing their best clothes and standing in a queue for a first day, first show ticket they couldn't even afford. But he turned on them the days they showed up with their noses red, their words mixing together like blood and water, their eyes swollen like full moons from sniffing whitener. Then Mendel stubbed out his gold-flaked kings on their wrists or shoulders, and he called it a waste of a good cigarette. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thanks.
being with us, Deepa. Thanks to everybody for watching. Here again is Deepa's book, La pattuglia dei bambini. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.